Welcome to Dusk and Empires. Tonight, we slip inside the candlelit basement of a Russian palace, where a mystic who had survived poison, bullets, and years of imperial hatred finally met his end in the frozen quiet of a December night. If this sounds like your kind of bedtime story, subscribe before you drift off. Now get comfortable, close your eyes, and let history carry you to sleep. Opening meditation. Close your eyes, if you have not already. Tonight we find ourselves in Saint Petersburg, Russia. The year is 1916. December has arrived with its full weight, the sky a low, pewter ceiling, the Neva River locked beneath a skin of dark ice. The city breathes slowly in the cold. Somewhere along the Moika Canal, a palace stands. Its windows are lit from within. Its rooms are warm with candlelight and anticipation. And a man is on his way there. A man whose name will echo across a century. Let this story carry you gently down into rest. Part 1: The Man from Siberia. There is a house, in a village so remote that in winter the trees crack from the cold like gunshots in the night. The village is called Pokrovskoy, and it sits on the broad flat plain of western Siberia, near the Tura River, in a silence so complete that the stars seem close enough to touch. It is in this village, sometime around the year 1869, that a child is born to a peasant couple named Efim and Anna Rasputin. They name him Grigory. Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin. He is not, at first glance, a remarkable child. He grows up among the smells of the earth, the dark loam of the fields, the wood smoke of the stove, the wet wool of his father's coat. He tends horses. He helps with the harvest. He lives the life of a Russian peasant, which is to say a life of labor in cold and occasional, brief warmth. But there is something in him that does not sit still. From an early age, those who knew him spoke of his eyes. Dark, deep-set, unnervingly steady. When Grigory Rasputin looked at you, people said, it was difficult to look away. Not because he was threatening, exactly. More as though something in those eyes simply held you, the way a fire holds you when the night is cold. He grows into a young man, and he marries, and for a time it seems as though he will live out his life in Pokrovskoy, simply and quietly. He and his wife, Praskovia, have children. 3 survive to adulthood: Dmitri, Maria, and Varvara. But the stillness does not hold him. As a young man, Rasputin becomes deeply drawn to the spiritual life. He undertakes long pilgrimages, walking hundreds of miles to monasteries, to holy sites, to the great religious centers of the Russian Empire. He walks through snow and summer dust alike. He sleeps in hayfields. He eats whatever strangers offer him. He prays with an intensity that those who witnessed it found difficult to describe. He is not a priest. He never becomes one. He has no formal theological training. But he develops a reputation as a Stranik, a wandering holy man, and in the deeply religious landscape of peasant Russia, this carries its own authority. People come to him with their illnesses, with their sorrows, with their unanswerable questions. And somehow, often, he helps them. Whether this was genuine spiritual gift, or the power of a forceful personality working on the suggestible human mind, is a question historians have wrestled with for more than a century. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the line between those two things is thinner than we tend to believe. By the early 1900s, Rasputin has made his way to Saint Petersburg. The city is a world utterly unlike anything in western Siberia. It is a city of palaces and gaslight and enormous ambition, a city built by Peter the Great on the swampy delta of the Neva River as a declaration to Europe: Russia has arrived. Russia is modern. Russia is imperial. The city glitters. It also seethes. Russia in the early 20th century is a country in deep tension with itself. The Tsar Nicholas II is a gentle, reserved man utterly unsuited to the turbulence of the age. His wife, the Empress Alexandra, is a German princess by birth, a woman of profound religious faith who has poured all of that faith into the desperate hope that anyone, can heal her son. Alexei, the Tsarevich, Crown Prince of all Russia. A child born with hemophilia, the bleeding disorder that ran through the royal families of Europe in those generations. A disease for which there was no cure. A disease that meant any bruise, any bump, any small wound could become a crisis. Could become fatal. Alexandra had tried everything. The best doctors in Russia. The best specialists in Europe. Nothing helped. And then, in 1905, she meets Grigory Rasputin. What happens in those first encounters is difficult to fully reconstruct. What we know is this: Rasputin seems to have an effect on Alexei. Whether through hypnotic suggestion, through some genuine somatic influence, through prayer, or through some mechanism we do not fully understand, his presence seems to ease the boy's suffering, to slow the bleeding episodes, to bring the child calm. And so Rasputin enters the orbit of the Russian imperial family. Gently at first, then more and more centrally. He becomes, in the eyes of the Empress, something between a healer and a saint. And in the eyes of nearly everyone else at court, the nobles, the ministers, the generals, something considerably more troubling. The whispers begin almost immediately. Here is a peasant, unwashed, barely literate, rough in his manners and blunt in his speech, sitting in the rooms of the imperial family. Here is a man of questionable spiritual background, who is linked to a sect of questionable practices, who drinks too much and who is rumored to have affairs with women of the court and the city. And here he is, apparently whispering in the ear of the Empress of all Russia. As the years pass and the world descends into the catastrophe of the First World War, Rasputin's influence seems to grow. Ministers are appointed and dismissed, apparently on his word. The Empress writes breathless letters to her husband at the front, full of Rasputin's pronouncements and advice. The Tsar, exhausted and emotionally distant, does not quite close the door. Russia bleeds on the Eastern Front. Millions die. The home front frays. And at the center of the empire, this strange, dark-eyed Siberian peasant sits in the warm rooms of the palace, and the court watches, and the court seats. By the autumn of 1916, a decision has been forming in several minds. The decision that something must be done. That Rasputin must be removed. That Russia cannot survive with this man at its heart. It is a decision that will lead, on the night of December the 16th, to a gathering at the Yusupov Palace on the Moika Canal. A gathering from which only some of the participants will emerge. Part 2: The Conspirators. Imagine a young man of extraordinary privilege, standing at a window overlooking the frozen Moika Canal, watching the snow fall in the lamplight below. He is handsome in the way of a fairy tale, high cheekbones, pale skin, dark eyes full of restless intelligence. He has traveled the world. He has studied at Oxford. He has wealth so vast that it barely seems real, even to him. His name is Felix Yusupov, and he is the heir to one of the greatest fortunes in Russia. The Yusupov family owns palaces across the empire. Their art collections rival those of the Tsar himself. Felix has grown up in a world of almost unimaginable luxury, a world of silk wallpaper and chandeliers and servants who anticipate every need before it is spoken. He is also, at the age of 29, consumed by what he sees as a patriotic mission. Felix Yusupov does not merely dislike Grigory Rasputin. He is convinced, with the deep conviction of a young man who has turned a political anxiety into a personal crusade, that Rasputin is destroying Russia. That this peasant mystic is the thread being pulled that will unravel the entire imperial tapestry. He is not alone in this conviction. The man he confides in first, and most deeply, is Vladimir Mitrofanovich Purishkevich. In many ways, Purishkevich is everything Yusupov is not. He is middle-aged where Felix is young. He is a politician, a member of the Duma, the Russian parliament, where Felix is an aristocrat with no formal public role. He is loud and theatrical where Felix is calculating and controlled. But Purishkevich has said publicly, in the Duma chamber itself, what many others only whisper. He has stood before his colleagues and warned them about the dangerous mystic at the court. He has used his political platform as a kind of pulpit, and his words have been reported in the newspapers, and the public has listened. There are others involved as well. Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a cousin of the Tsar himself, and one of the Tsar's favorite relatives, joins the circle. Dmitry is 24 years old. He is athletic, charming, beloved in the social world of the capital. He had served on the front and carries with him the weight of what he has seen there. The idea that Russia is being led to ruin by an incompetent government guided by a peasant impostor sits very heavily with him. There is also a military officer named Captain Sukhatin, and a physician, Dr. Stanislas Lazavert. These men will play supporting roles in what is to come, but they are present, and their presence matters. It tells us something about how broadly this discontent has spread, reaching from the aristocracy to the military to the professional classes. The plan, as it takes shape through the autumn of 1916, is relatively simple in its broad outline, though complicated in its particulars. Felix Yusupov will use a personal friendship that he has cultivated with Rasputin to lure him to the Yusupov Palace. Once there, in the private rooms below the main floors, the basement rooms that Felix has been secretly decorating for weeks, Rasputin will be killed. This is spoken very calmly, in the private rooms of the Yusupov Palace, by these well-dressed men with their elegant manners. The word is used without flinching. Killed. He will be killed. It is worth pausing here, in the warmth of this narration, to feel the weight of that. These are not rough men. These are not gangsters or soldiers who have been hardened to violence. They are, most of them, men who have lived very comfortable lives. And yet they have gathered, in the dim December of 1916, and spoken calmly of murder. History does not preserve for us the full texture of what that room felt like. But we can imagine the candlelight, the silver on the table, the smell of tobacco and good wine, the long silences between sentences, as each man sits with the weight of what he is proposing. The justification they offer themselves is political. Rasputin is dangerous to Russia. Removing him is a patriotic act. If the legal mechanisms of the state cannot or will not act, then private citizens of conscience must. This reasoning is ancient, it was used by the conspirators against Julius Caesar, and it is always fragile, always dependent on a certainty about the rightness of one's own judgment that history rarely vindicates. But they believe it. At least, they believe it enough to proceed. Felix Yusupov's personal connection to Rasputin is the key. He has been meeting with the mystic for weeks, cultivating the relationship carefully. He has visited Rasputin's apartment on Gorokovaya Street. He has sat with him and drunk tea and listened to his long, wandering religious pronouncements. He has been, to all appearances, a young man of means and searching soul, drawn to a wise man for spiritual guidance. And Rasputin, for his part, seems to have genuinely liked Felix. To have trusted him, in the particular way that Rasputin trusted beautiful young people who seemed to seek him out. There is something almost sad in this, the warmth of a relationship built entirely on deception, the trust being carefully stacked like wood against the moment it will be burned. Yusupov also uses another lure. He speaks to Rasputin of his wife, Irina. The Princess Irina Yusupova, Felix's wife, is by any measure one of the most beautiful women in Russia. She is also, as Rasputin knows perfectly well, a niece of the Tsar himself. The thought of meeting her, of being brought into the family's intimate circle, is irresistible to a man who has always been drawn to aristocratic proximity. There is only one problem with this particular arrangement. Irina is, at the time of the planned meeting, nowhere near Saint Petersburg. She is in Crimea. She will not be at the palace on the night in question. She is, in the most literal sense, a fiction being used to set the trap. The date is set. December 16th. An evening gathering, late, after midnight, because Rasputin prefers to visit privately, after the household has quieted, to avoid the attention of the city's gossiping eyes. The preparations are made. The basement room is decorated with antique furniture and oriental rugs. Wine is purchased. Cakes are obtained. And poison, potassium cyanide, is prepared. The stage is set. Part 3, the basement room. There is something about basements. Not cellars for wine, not merely storage, but inhabited basement rooms, rooms fitted out for human company, rooms where someone has gone to deliberate effort to create an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. There is something about such rooms that speaks to the idea of the hidden life. Of what happens below the visible surface of things. The basement room at the Yusupov Palace on the Moika Canal is, by December of 1916, a space that Felix has been quietly preparing for weeks. It is a low-ceilinged space that runs beneath the main floors of the palace, reached by a private staircase from the courtyard entrance. It has been fitted out in the ornate Russian taste of the period, heavy furniture upholstered in dark leather, walls hung with tapestry, a bearskin rug on the stone floor. There are carved wooden cabinets. A fireplace where logs are burning. A low table set with the things one puts out for a late-night gathering, wine glasses, bottles, a tray of small cakes. The room is warm. The smell of wood smoke mingles with the cold smell of the stones. Candlelight moves on the ceiling. There is also, in this room, a cabinet. And in that cabinet, among various objects, a small quantity of potassium cyanide crystals and potassium cyanide powder. The powder has been incorporated into some of the cakes. The crystals have been dissolved into some of the wine, or so the plan intends. The preparation of this poison is the work of Dr. Lazavert, who has knowledge of such things. Above the basement, on the floor above, the other conspirators wait. Purishkevich is there. Grand Duke Dmitri. Captain Sukotin. They move quietly. They have been told to make some noise, to play music on the gramophone, to simulate the sounds of a social gathering, because when Rasputin arrives, he must believe that a party is in progress upstairs, and that Irina will come down to join them when her other guests have gone. The gramophone, when it plays one particular record. A bright, cheerful American popular song of the period, Yankee Doodle, or so it is often said, though accounts vary. The music floats up from the gramophone into the cold upper rooms of the palace, incongruous and oddly innocent against the backdrop of what is being planned. Let us take a moment, here, to feel the texture of that upper room as well. The conspirators are waiting. They have been waiting for hours. They have spoken and fallen silent and spoken again. Some of them, perhaps, are beginning to feel the first cool tremor of doubt, the quiet knowledge that once tonight is over, nothing can be undone. Grand Duke Dmitri, by several accounts, is uncomfortable. He is 24 years old and he comes from a family whose loyalty to the Tsar is total and instinctive. He is not sure, even now, that this is the right path. But he has given his word. He has committed. He stays. Purishkevich, the veteran politician, is the steadiest of them. He has argued publicly for years that Rasputin must be dealt with. He is not wavering. He paces the room slowly, occasionally looking out the window at the canal below, its surface a plain of dark ice under the faint light of the street lamps. Felix Yusupov has gone to collect Rasputin. It is after midnight now. Saint Petersburg sleeps, or pretends to. The city is at war, Russia is at war, and the wartime curfew has settled a certain exhausted quiet over the streets. A motor car moves through those streets, its lights cutting through the light snowfall, carrying Felix Yusupov to the apartment on Gorokovaya Street where Rasputin lives. Felix sits in the back of the car, very still. He has been preparing for this for weeks. He has rehearsed. And yet, as the car moves through the sleeping city, the reality of what he is about to do must be pressing in on him from all sides. Here is what we do not often speak about, when we speak of conspiracies, the moments of pure physical reality. The cold smell of the car's interior. The sound of the engine. The way the city looks at past midnight, in winter, when the snow is falling. These unremarkable sensory facts, sitting alongside a decision of enormous consequence. The car arrives on Gorokovaya Street. Part 4, The Last Apartment. The apartment building on Gorokovaya Street where Rasputin lived has a certain ordinariness to it. Not a palace. Not a peasant's hut. A middle-class building of the kind that lined many streets in the capital, solid, a little dark, unremarkable from the outside. But inside, Rasputin's apartment had become something remarkable. It had become a pilgrimage destination. Every morning, for years, a line of petitioners had formed outside this building. Noble women and factory workers. Army officers and provincial merchants. Mothers with sick children. Men with ruined careers. People seeking cures, connections, intercessions with the imperial family. People who believed, with various degrees of sincerity, that this Siberian peasant could open doors, divine or earthly, that were closed to everyone else. The apartment itself was, by all accounts, a peculiar mixture of the rustic and the lavish. Rasputin had accumulated gifts from grateful or hopeful admirers over the years: icons in gilded frames, embroidered cushions, expensive rugs. But he lived among them with a certain peasant indifference to decoration. The place was warm, always. The smell of his pipe tobacco. The smell of the oil lamps. On this particular night, the night of December 16, 1916, the apartment is quiet. Rasputin has been told that Felix will come for him late, and he has told his housekeeper and the others in the household not to wait up. What has he done during the evening? The historical record is imprecise on this point. What we can say is that he has spent time in prayer, as was his custom. He has written letters. He has eaten. He has perhaps sat for a time in the warmth of his apartment, in the company of the icons on the walls, the painted faces of saints, the gold leaf catching the lamplight, and felt whatever a man of his nature felt in those interior hours. He has dressed with more care than usual. There is a silk blouse, a beautiful one, embroidered with cornflowers, which he has been given and which he seems to have saved for special occasions. He wears it tonight, over his dark trousers, with his leather boots carefully pulled on. He knows he is going somewhere worth dressing for. There is a persistent legend that Rasputin had premonitions about this night. That he had spoken to friends in the preceding days about the possibility of his death. That he had, in some sense, known what was coming. This may be true, or it may be the kind of retrospective certainty that attaches itself to significant figures after the fact. We are always tempted to assign to the great and the strange a foreknowledge they may or may not have possessed. What is perhaps more credible is this: Rasputin was not naive. He had lived for years in the dangerous currents of court politics. He had survived earlier assassination attempts. He had enemies everywhere, and he was not unaware of them. He had written, in a letter intended to be read after his death if he were killed by nobles, a passage that has been quoted many times since, a warning that his death would presage the destruction of the Romanov dynasty. Whether he wrote those words months before or just before the night in question, and under what circumstances, is a matter of scholarly debate. But the words themselves carry a weight that the subsequent history of Russia makes difficult to set aside. He hears the knock at the door. He pulls on his fur coat. He descends the stairs. Felix Yusupov is waiting in the cold, by the car. The two men greet each other. There is, in the accounts that survive, a moment of ordinary social exchange, pleasantries about the cold, about the lateness of the hour. The human surface of a moment that has an entirely different reality underneath. They get into the car. The car moves through the empty streets toward the Moika Canal. Neither man speaks very much. The city passes by the windows, the broad Neva in the distance, the dark silhouettes of government buildings, the occasional lamp still burning in an upper window. The Yusupov Palace comes into view. Part 5: Arrival at the Palace. The Yusupov Palace sits on the southern embankment of the Moika Canal, not far from the intersection of canals and broad avenues that makes this part of Saint Petersburg so distinctive, a city that seems always to be reflected in its own dark water. The palace is one of the grandest private residences in Russia. Its facade, on the canal side, is a study in imperial elegance, pale ochre walls, tall windows, classical pilasters, the quietly confident architecture of a family that has been immensely wealthy for generations. The car approaches from the side, through a back courtyard entrance. This is deliberate. Felix does not want Rasputin to be seen entering the main palace entrance. The neighbors are not to know who is visiting and when. They pull into the courtyard. The snow has settled into the cobblestones, muffling the sound of the car's arrival. The night is very quiet. Very cold. From above, from the rooms on the upper floor, one can faintly hear music. The gramophone, playing its cheerful, incongruous American tune. Felix has arranged this. The music is meant to create the impression of a party, a gathering, from which Irina will presently descend. Rasputin hears the music. He comments on it, perhaps with approval. There is a certain quality in him that has always been drawn to life, to warmth, to the presence of people and sound and movement. They enter through the courtyard door, and descend the private stair to the basement room. And here is where the evening's elaborate preparation meets the simple reality of a room, and two people in it. The basement room is warm. The fire is burning well. The candles are lit. The table is set with wine and cakes. The heavy oriental rugs absorb the sound. Everything is exactly as Felix has arranged it. Rasputin sits down. He looks around the room with what appears to be, by Felix's own account, written years later, genuine pleasure. He admires the furniture. He admires the arrangement. Felix explains that Irina is still with her guests upstairs, but that she will be down shortly. He apologizes for the wait. He pours wine. He offers the cakes. And here the evening enters one of its most strange and unsettling passages. Rasputin does not eat the cakes immediately. He looks at them but does not reach for them. He drinks some tea, which has been brought. He talks. He is in a conversational mood, warm, discursive, the kind of broad and wandering talk that those who knew him often described. Religion. The war. The imperial family. The state of Russia. Felix watches him. Talks with him. Waits. The minutes pass. The music plays faintly above. The fire settles. Eventually, Rasputin does eat one of the poisoned cakes. Then another. He drinks from the glass of poisoned wine. Nothing happens. Felix waits, with the particular quality of attention that is almost unbearable to contemplate, watching a man he has poisoned, watching him continue to talk, to gesture, to drink, to be entirely and thoroughly alive. Nothing happens. More time passes. Perhaps 30 minutes. Perhaps more. The accounts vary. Rasputin asks for more Madeira wine, the sweet wine he prefers. He eats more cake. He seems, if anything, to be settling into a pleasant evening. Nothing happens. This is the central mystery of the Rasputin story, the moment that has captured imaginations for more than a century. Was the poison insufficient? Was it improperly prepared? Did the sweetness of the cake and wine somehow neutralize or slow its effect? Or had Rasputin, over years of exposure to substances of various kinds, developed some tolerance? Or is it simply that some accounts of the evening have been exaggerated, and the cakes were not as heavily laced as later claimed? We do not, in the end, fully know. What we know is this: Rasputin does not die from the poison. And Felix Yusupov, sitting across from him in the warm basement room, with the music playing softly above, begins to understand that the plan he has so carefully made is unraveling. Part 6, The Long Wait Below. Consider what it is to wait. Not waiting in an ordinary sense, waiting for a train, waiting for news, waiting for a kettle to boil. but waiting in the specific, airless quality of a space where you have committed to a course of action that has not yet been completed, and the person central to your plan is sitting across from you, entirely alive, and talking about God. This is where Felix Yusupov finds himself, through the late hours of December 16, 1916. Rasputin talks. This is something that all who knew him agreed upon. He was a talker. Not a systematic speaker, not a man who argued in ordered propositions, but a talker in the Russian peasant tradition, a storyteller who moved between the sacred and the profane without any apparent transition, who could speak about the Gospels and then about the war and then about a woman he had met in the market and then circle back to something theological, all without pausing or seeming to notice any discontinuity. On this particular night, Rasputin talks about Irina. He is genuinely looking forward to meeting her. He talks about the imperial family, with warmth and familiarity. He mentions the Empress. He mentions the Tsarevich Alexei. Something about this, in the extremity of the situation, must have been almost unbearable for Felix to hear. Here is a man speaking with affection about people Felix would claim he is trying to protect. Here is a man who is, by all accounts, genuinely present to this moment, genuinely enjoying this evening, entirely unaware. Felix excuses himself. He goes upstairs to where the other conspirators wait. The upper room has been a waiting room for hours now. Purishkevich and Grand Duke Dmitri and the others have been listening to the gramophone and moving quietly about and watching the clock. They have drunk some wine themselves, a natural enough response to a long, tense wait. Felix tells them what has happened. That the poison has not worked. That Rasputin is still sitting in the basement room, perfectly alive, drinking wine and talking. The decision is made, Felix will go back down. He will take a revolver with him. If Rasputin gives no sign of being affected by the poison after a little more time, Felix will use the revolver. It is Dmitri's revolver that is offered. Felix takes it. He goes back down the stairs to the basement room. Rasputin is still there. Still alive. Still warm and present in the firelight. He has been exploring the room a little, looking at the carved cabinets, admiring a crystal crucifix displayed on one of them. This detail, the crucifix, is one that Felix will use later, in his own account of what happens next. He tells Rasputin to look at the crucifix and pray, or to kneel and pray. The exact words vary in the different accounts that have been given. But what happens is this: Felix fires the revolver. Rasputin is shot. He falls. He lies on the floor of the basement room, in the light of the candles and the fire, and he is still. Felix goes back upstairs. He tells the others. Rasputin is dead. It is over. There is a moment, perhaps, of collective release. Of the particular exhaustion that follows extreme tension. Purishkevich keeps watch. The others begin to discuss the next steps. The body must be removed, taken to the river, disposed of in the dark water under the ice. Felix goes back down. Part 7. What happened in the dark? There are moments in history that become legendary not because they are perfectly documented, but because something about them resists easy explanation. Because they seem to bend slightly, in the retelling, toward myth. What happens next in the basement of the Yusupov Palace is one of those moments. Felix descends the stairs. He approaches the body. He leans down, and by his own account, in his own memoir, Written years afterward, he sees Rasputin's eye twitch. Sees one eye open. And then Rasputin rises. This is the moment that has been retold hundreds of times. In books, in films, in conversations over a century of fascination. Grigory Rasputin, shot at close range, lying dead on the floor of the Yusupov Palace, stands up. Felix runs. He goes for the stairs. Behind him, Rasputin is already moving, by Felix's account, pulling at the epaulette of Felix's jacket, already calling his name. Already on his feet and moving toward the door that leads to the courtyard. He gets through the door. He is outside, in the cold courtyard, in the snow. He is moving. He is calling out. The accounts differ on what exactly he is saying. Some say he is calling Felix a traitor, that he is crying out that he will tell the Empress everything. Others are less specific. But he is alive. He is moving. He is in the courtyard under the winter sky. Purishkevich, upstairs, hears the commotion. He comes to a window. He sees, in the pale light of the courtyard, a figure moving across the snow. He runs down. He comes out into the courtyard. He fires. His first shots miss, by his own admission. He bites his own hand in frustrated concentration, as he would later describe in his diary, trying to steady himself. He fires again. Rasputin falls in the snow. There is a stillness now. The snow. The cold. The faint sound of the canal somewhere beyond the courtyard wall. The men gather. Felix, shaking. Purishkevich. They look at what lies in the snow. What happens next is violent and dark, and history documents it as such. The body is struck multiple times, bound, wrapped, and prepared for removal. The full clinical details of what the conspirators do are things that do not need to be described in explicit terms here. What we can say is that by the time they have finished, there is no possibility of life remaining. And yet the legend of Rasputin's extraordinary resistance has grown in the century since, not only from Felix's highly colored memoir, but from the forensic evidence that would later be gathered. Rasputin had indeed been shot multiple times. He had been struck. He had, against all expectation, moved and cried out. Whether this represents something supernatural, as the legend would have it, or simply the terrible tenacity of a physically powerful man whose vital organs had not been instantly destroyed by the first shot, this is the question that has never quite been resolved. The medical explanations are entirely sufficient. The mystery lies not in the mechanism, but in the image. The image of a man moving through the snow. His embroidered silk blouse under his fur coat. His boots on the cobblestones. His dark eyes and his impossible will. There is something in this image that the century has not been able to let go. Part 8, The River. The city is asleep. There are no witnesses on the streets at this hour. The snow is falling again, lightly, filling in the traces of movement, softening everything. At the bridge, they stop. It is very cold. The kind of cold that makes every breath visible, that seeps through fur coats and wool gloves and settles into the bone. The body, bound, weighted with chains, wrapped in a fur coat, is dropped through a hole in the ice. The river accepts it, as rivers accept everything, without comment, without ceremony, with the same indifference it has always shown to what human beings bring to its banks. The men return to the city. To the palace. to their separate lives. By morning, the snow has covered the tracks on the bridge. The river moves beneath its ice, slow and dark and private. But something has been dropped on the bridge, one of Rasputin's boots, or a galosh, depending on the account. This small, careless, utterly human detail will prove significant. It will be noticed. It will lead investigators to the site. 3 days later, on December 19th, the body of Grigory Efimovich Rasputin will be pulled from the frozen river by the police of Saint Petersburg. An autopsy will be conducted. Its findings will be debated for decades. There will be questions about the gunshots, about the sequence of events, about what exactly the cause of death was. There will be claims, some of them made with great authority, some of them more questionable, that there was water in the lungs, suggesting that Rasputin may have been alive, at some level, when he entered the river. This claim has been challenged by later medical analysis. The weight of current forensic opinion is that Rasputin was dead before he reached the water. But the alternative story, of a man who could not be killed, who died in the end not by bullet or poison but by drowning beneath the ice of a Russian river, that story has its own gravitational pull. It attaches itself to the figure of Rasputin like iron filings to a magnet. It becomes part of the myth. And myths, once established, are very difficult to dissolve. They have their own life, separate from the facts, moving through time like water beneath ice, invisible but present, shaping the landscape without being seen. Part 9: The City That Woke. Saint Petersburg in the days after Rasputin's disappearance and discovery was a city in a particular state, not quite shock, and not quite relief. Something more ambivalent than either of those. The rumors began almost immediately. In a city at war, in a winter of hardship and low morale, where bread prices had been climbing for months and where the lists of the dead from the front seemed to grow longer every week, the news that Rasputin had been killed moved through the streets with remarkable speed. And the response, among many ordinary people of St. Petersburg, was not grief. It was something closer to a kind of bitter relief. At church doorways, in market stalls, in the lines of women waiting for bread, people spoke the news quietly and nodded. This is important to sit with. The conspirators believed they were acting for Russia. And in some circles, not just among the aristocracy, but among the broader population, there was something like gratitude. Rasputin was genuinely hated, genuinely feared, genuinely associated in the popular imagination with everything that was going wrong with the empire. At the same time, in the rooms of the Winter Palace, in the private apartments of the Empress Alexandra, there was a grief of an entirely different register. Alexandra had known almost immediately that something was wrong. She had sent for Rasputin and received no reply. She had been told of the gathering at the Yusupov Palace. By the morning of December 17th, before the body had been found, she had already understood. Her letters to the Tsar Nicholas was at the front, at the headquarters of the Russian army, in the city of Mogilev. These letters are among the most raw documents of the period. She writes of her grief not in the measured language of a monarch but in the direct, almost primitive language of a mother, a friend, a believer. Our friend is gone. The light has gone out. Nicholas, for his part, returns to the capital. He is distressed but restrained. He will not have Felix Yusupov and Grand Duke Dmitry tried for murder, though there are those who demand it. Instead, he orders Felix banished to his family estate in the provinces, and Dmitry sent to serve on the Persian front. This is a punishment that many in the court consider absurdly lenient. Purishkevich, the politician who fired the final shots, faces no punishment at all in the end. He leaves for the front and continues his work there. The punishment meted out by the Tsar reveals something about Nicholas that historians have often noted: his fundamental inability to act with the firmness that the moment demanded. He knows that what has happened is murder. He knows who did it. And he sentences them to comfortable inconvenience. Meanwhile, Alexandra arranges for Rasputin's body to be buried privately, on a corner of the imperial estate at Tsarskoye Selo. The burial is quiet, attended by the imperial family and a few trusted servants. Alexandra is present. So, reportedly, are the Tsar's daughters. The grave is marked modestly. At the bottom of the grave, Alexandra places an icon and, reportedly, a letter that she had written to Rasputin. The letter is never made public. Its contents are not known. And there they lay, the Empress's words to the peasant mystic who had held her son's life in his hands, sealed beneath the earth of the imperial park, in the cold Russian December. Part 10: The End of the Empire. Rasputin had written, or is said to have written, that if he were killed by nobles, the Tsar would lose his throne within 2 years. If he were killed by peasants, the dynasty would endure for centuries. He was killed by nobles. The Tsar lost his throne within 10 weeks. History does not, of course, work by prophecy. The Russian Revolution of February 1917 was not caused by Rasputin's death. Its causes were vast and structural and had been building for decades: the enormous strains of the First World War, the failures of agricultural reform, the widening chasm between the imperial court and the mass of the Russian population, the inefficiency and corruption of the state apparatus, the rise of political movements that had been gathering strength since 1905. And yet, there is something undeniable in the timing. Rasputin had been, for all his faults, a particular kind of bridge between the imperial family and the peasant world they claimed to rule. He had been, in the Empress's mind, a divine protector of the dynasty. His presence, controversial, disruptive, often genuinely damaging to the reputation of the court, had also been, in some strange way, a sign that something lived at the center of the empire. Something vital, something raw. With his death, something changed in Alexandra. Not at once, and not simply. But the letters and journals of the period following his death show a woman who has lost her certainty. Who prays more desperately and with less of the bedrock assurance she once had. Who feels the cold moving in. The Tsar's government, without Rasputin to argue against in the salons, does not suddenly become more competent. The war continues to go badly. The food shortages worsen. The workers of Petrograd, as Saint Petersburg had been renamed in 1914, in a patriotic de-Germanization of the name, go out on strike in February. The strikes become marches. The marches become something larger. By March 1917, Nicholas II has abdicated. The dynasty is over. The conspirators who had hoped that removing Rasputin would save Russia watch from their various places of exile and comfortable punishment as Russia dissolves into revolution. Felix Yusupov, from his country estate, watches. He will eventually flee Russia entirely, spending the rest of his long life in Paris, where he will write his memoirs and become, in the Paris émigré world, a figure of complex notoriety. He will live until 1967. Purishkevich, the passionate nationalist, will find that the revolution is not what he hoped for and will die in 1920 during the Civil War. Grand Duke Dmitry will be saved from the chaos precisely because he was banished to Persia before the revolution. He will escape Russia and live in Europe for years, eventually marrying an American heiress and dying in 1942. Tsar Nicholas and his family, Alexandra, and the 4 daughters, and Alexei the Tsarevich, whose illness had set so much of this story in motion, will be executed by the Bolsheviks in a basement room in Ekaterinburg in July 1918. Their story is one of the great tragic codas of the 20th century. And Rasputin, in a sense, outlives all of them. His body was discovered in the months after the February Revolution, and in the chaotic days of the provisional government, a crowd came to the Imperial Park and dragged his coffin out. They burned it in a field. The smoke rose over the Petrograd sky and dispersed. The empire he had been accused of undermining was already gone. Part 11, The Legend That Would Not Die. Every century, it seems, rediscovers Rasputin. He has been the subject of films since the silent era. There have been novels, operas, comic books, stage plays, songs. In 1978, a disco group named Boney M released a song called Rasputin that became an international hit, and generations of people who have never read a history book know the broad outline of the story from its lyrics alone. This persistence is worth thinking about. Why does the story of a Siberian peasant who lived at the Russian court for a decade, and was killed in a palace basement, continue to grip the imagination of the world a century after his death? Part of the answer lies in the story itself. It has everything that makes narrative irresistible: the poor boy who rises to the highest levels of power, the mystery of genuine influence, the dark and complicated death, the falling empire, the prophecy that comes true. Part of the answer lies in the ambiguity of Rasputin himself. He is not simply a villain. He is not simply a saint. He is a figure who seems to contain contradictions that resist resolution: the genuine peasant piety and the earthly appetites, the real effect on the Tsarevich and the questionable claims made about his powers, the sincere warmth he seems to have shown to the humble and the ruthless manipulation of the powerful. He is, in other words, very human. Extravagantly, unusually, improbably human. And it is this that makes him persist. The historical Rasputin, the man who walked the long pilgrim roads of Russia in the 1890s, who sat by bedsides and prayed with a sincerity that no one who saw it doubted, who genuinely loved the Tsarevich and was genuinely loved in return, who died in a palace basement with his embroidered blouse beneath his coat, this man is more interesting, not less, than the legend. The legend strips him of complexity. It turns him into a monster or a miracle, a symbol of decadence or an avatar of the mystical East. It makes him large and flat. The history returns him to scale. It gives him his hunger, his generosity, his vanity, his faith, his failures. It gives him back his humanity, which is the most interesting thing anyone can possess. Felix Yusupov's memoir, published first in 1927, is the primary source for most accounts of the night. It is also a deeply unreliable document. Felix was a brilliant, narcissistic, self-dramatizing writer who had every reason to shape the story to his own advantage, and every opportunity to do so. The other participants left their own accounts, which agree with Felix's version on the broad outline and diverge on many details. Purishkevich's diary, which he kept meticulously during this period, is in some ways more credible, not because it is less colored by personality, but because it was written closer to the events, with less of the retrospective shaping that memoir inevitably involves. What emerges from all these sources, overlaid and compared, is not a clean narrative. It is something messier and more real, the picture of a night that went wrong from the start, that went wrong in multiple ways, that involved 5 men who were frightened and inadequate to the task they had set themselves, and 1 man who refused, for what seemed like an impossible length of time, to die. The Russian government has in recent years conducted new forensic and historical investigations into the circumstances of Rasputin's death. These investigations have, in general, supported more prosaic explanations. The poison was less lethal than claimed or improperly administered, the first shot was not well placed, the movement in the courtyard was a physical reflex of a man already fatally wounded, the drowning claim is not supported by the evidence. And yet the image remains. The figure in the snow. The dark eyes. The embroidered blouse. The river. These things remain in the imagination as facts remain in archives available to anyone who goes looking, refusing to be fully explained away. Part 12: What the Night Meant. It is worth returning, at the end of this long journey through the story, to the Yusupov Palace on the Moika Canal. To the basement room. That room still exists. The Yusupov Palace is today a museum, open to visitors. You can walk down the same staircase that Felix walked on that night. You can stand in the room recreated, decorated, the furniture positioned as it is believed to have been. You can see the fireplace, the low ceiling, the place where the table was set. Thousands of visitors come every year, from all over the world. They stand in the room and feel what visitors always feel in the places where history happened, a kind of particular quiet. The sense that the room remembers something even if the room cannot speak. What did that night mean? It did not save Russia. The conspirators' stated purpose, to remove Rasputin and thereby stabilize the empire, failed entirely. Russia went through revolution, civil war, and the long trauma of Soviet rule in the decades that followed. The things the conspirators most feared came to pass, and then other things they could not have imagined. It did not even accomplish the specific personal goals of those involved. Felix Yusupov spent the rest of his life in exile, a famous but faded figure in the Paris émigré world, his enormous inheritance largely dissipated, his most notable act being the subject of his own most famous book. And it demonstrated something about the nature of conspiracy that history demonstrates again and again, that the world is rarely changed by a secret action of a small group of individuals acting on their own judgment about what is best for everyone. The world is changed by forces much larger and slower than any single night. The war would not have been won by Rasputin's absence. The revolution would not have been prevented by his death. The structural failures of the Romanov dynasty were not a problem that could be solved by one act in one basement. And yet the night at the Yusupov Palace is not simply a footnote. It is a convergence point, a place where the private and the historical meet, where the personal decisions of a small number of people intersect with the vast currents of an age. Where the very last days of Imperial Russia take on a human face. The face of Felix Yusupov, young and pale and frightened in the basement room. The face of Purishkevich, biting his own hand in the courtyard to steady his aim. The face of Grand Duke Dmitry, 24 years old, watching history make itself around him and not knowing, quite, who he was in the story. And the face of Rasputin himself. Walking through the cold streets of midnight Saint Petersburg, dressed in his best embroidered blouse, looking forward to meeting a beautiful woman, entirely unaware. He was, in the end, a man of his time. Drawn from the vast Russian peasantry, shaped by a profound and genuine religious tradition, gifted with a presence that could not be entirely explained, limited by his appetites and his vanity and his inability or unwillingness to understand the uses to which his closeness to the throne was being put. He loved the Tsarevich, and the Tsarevich loved him back. This, more than anything else in the story, is perhaps what lingers. In the midst of all the politics and suspicion and murder, there was this, a boy who suffered, and a man who helped him not to suffer. Whatever else was happening in the rooms of the empire, there was this small, private, genuine thing. History is always like this, in the end. The grand narratives of empires and revolutions are always built over foundations of personal stories. Individual bonds. Private griefs. The ordinary warmth between people who found each other, somehow, in the middle of the historical storm. The storm came anyway. The storm always comes. But for a time, in the warm rooms of the Winter Palace and the Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, a woman prayed beside her son's bed, and the man she had sent for came, and the boy's pain eased, and the mother wept with relief. This happened. In the middle of everything else that happened, this happened. The river has carried much away. But it has not carried this. Closing meditation. Let the story settle now, like snow settling on the ice of the Moika Canal. Let the figures of the night, Felix at the window, Rasputin on the stairs, the conspirators in the upper room, the Empress in her private prayers, let them grow still, as figures in old photographs are still. Fixed. Held. Part of the past, which is to say part of what is finished, what is no longer moving, what can no longer hurt us. You are here. In warmth. In safety. The cold of a Russian December is far away. The candles in the basement room have long since gone out. The river has moved, as rivers always move, steadily and without urgency, carrying everything south and west and finally into the sea. History is always like this, it moves through us, and then it moves past us, and it becomes something we carry lightly. A knowledge of what once was. A tenderness toward the people who lived through things we can only imagine. Feel the surface you are lying on. The weight of the blanket across you. The temperature of the air against your face, and how different it is from the air outside, the way warmth always feels more vivid when you know the cold is somewhere near. The Neva River is still there, in what is now called Saint Petersburg once again, after its long decades of other names. The Yusupov Palace still stands on the Moika Canal. The city still exists, with its pale facades and its dark water and its long winter nights. The people in this story are gone. They have been gone for a long time. But they were real. They breathed in the cold. They doubted. They acted. They were wrong. They were, occasionally, right. They were alive, as you are alive now, in this quiet room, on this quiet night. Let your breathing slow. Let the images of the story dissolve, one by one, like candles going out in a long room, the embroidered blouse, the fireplace, the frozen river, the snow in the courtyard, the gramophone playing in the dark. There is nothing to hold on to. Let them go. The night is long. The room is warm. The story is finished. Rest now. If you're still awake, that's okay. Just close your eyes and let the story carry you. Subscribe to History for Sleep for a new story every week. Sweet dreams.